founder Acharya lesson is called his ISKCON branch. Okay. You may remember last time we ended at the point of Mahatma Gandhi being assassinated just after Prabhupada had written him a letter advising him to give up politics, or else he would end up like Hitler and Tojo and all these, Mussolini, all these World War II characters. Shocking as it was, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi in January 1948 only intensified Prabhupada's desire to spread the movement of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and Lord Chaitanya. Unable to engage the Mahatma during his life, Abhay would now try to engage him in death to launch his mission as, quote, the Gita Nagari, his spiritual vision of how to properly honor Gandhi. Here is an excerpt from a proposal Prabhupada first made to the Indian government. So ironically, Gandhi's assassination, it triggered in Prabhupada a whole idea of how to use Gandhi's name in death to launch Prabhupada's own spiritual mission. So here's an excerpt from a letter that Prabhupada wrote to the Indian government. Specifically, I believe it was to Dr. Sardar Patel, Nehru's deputy prime minister. Quote, the Gita Nagari, which means the village where the Bhagavad Gita is sung and lived, will properly utilize the huge resources of Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Fund. Gandhi's memory can be well preserved by his exemplary activities, and not simply by constructions of huge buildings or dead stone statues. Mahatma Gandhi was a saintly reformer, and his memorial fund may be utilized for the purpose of converting degraded persons into saintly order. Unquote. Prabhupada urged the fund's director to, quote, keep in motion Gandhi's spiritual movements, unquote. So this is what Prabhupada meant by his spiritual movements. His prayerful recitation of sacred sounds, his restoration of deities to temples, his recognition of everyone as a Harijan, a person of God, and his ideal of a spiritually harmonious society. Quote, the above fourfold Gandhi movements, he wrote, if done in an organized, scientific way, supported by all the authentic scriptures of all religions, will bring in the tranquility of peace and a respite from all harshness and bitterness of the present world, which we have longed for till now, unquote. So Prabhupada's saying, look, we have an opportunity through Gandhi to actually bring peace to the world. But fresh from independence, India's leaders longed only to be, quote, modern, and were uninterested in Prabhupada's spiritual proposals. So where I am now, there's somebody coming around with this leaf blower again. So I'll try to speak loud because you're going to hear something pretty loud, maybe in the background. So I'll just try to speak over it. Undaunted, in 1952, Prabhupada found his first receptive audience among medical students in the northern Indian town of Jhansi. One of the students was able to connect him with a pious estate executor who let him use the estate's property and buildings to teach and to rebrand his mission as, quote, the League of Devotees. So when government and business leaders didn't listen to Prabhupada about how to properly honor Gandhi and help him make a whole community based on the Gita's teachings, which was, Gandhi said, was his book of inspiration, then Prabhupada found a receptive audience in Jhansi, in UP. Because there was an Ayurvedic medical college there. And so they were interested in what Prabhupada had to say because they were into all things Vedic. Canvassing among the students, Prabhupada ran an ad in the local newspaper. So Prabhupada's very enterprising, and he ran an ad in the local Jhansi paper. It's quite a bold ad. Quote, wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins. Here comes the leaf blower. For preaching the teachings of Bhagavad Gita for all practical purposes throughout the world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees. So much later on, years later, when Prabhupada was spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world, Harijan Prabhu, Prabhupada's servant who's still writing the Transcendental Diary. He's got 5 volumes. He has 2 more to write. He said he was in Prabhupada's rooms in the old Rana Damodar temple, revisiting where Prabhupada used to stay. And there were still some old papers in the room from the League of Devotees. Prabhupada had saved his League of Devotees papers because a lot of what Prabhupada was preaching in the League of Devotees later became principles and purposes in ISKCON. So Harijan was amazed because he didn't know anything about, because we didn't know anything about Prabhupada's previous life then, just a little bits and pieces he would share with us. So he found this flyer for the League of Devotees. So Harijan said, what's this, Prabhupada? You had a movement in India before you came to America? What's this League of Devotees? So Prabhupada laughed. He said, oh, yeah, that was just me. Because Prabhupada identifies himself in this ad as A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees. And he's advertising that anybody who wants to join him will be provided free boarding and lodging. He didn't have any money. He didn't have any, that place he was staying, it wasn't his. But as Prabhupada told us, he never thought small. Whatever little he had a big vision. So the peace that the League of Nations had failed to bring after World War I, that the United Nations would also fail to bring after World War II, the League of Devotees would now bring through systematic spiritual education, quote, and thereby achieve real unity and peace of the contending elements of the present world, unquote. Because all these other peace movements, they're based on ever-shifting, ever-changing material considerations. So Prabhupada wanted to establish something on a solid spiritual platform which would last with a real common center, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The events that would compel Prabhupada to eventually set aside the League, leave his family, accept the renounced order of life, and finally journey solo to the West have been well documented in Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita. What concerns us here is how he finally established his mission as ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, unfolding its purposes in distinct phases. So first it was BTG in the 40s, and in the 50s, it was, well, even in the late 40s, Prabhupada had this Gita Nagari scheme. He was trying to conceptualize and manifest how he was going to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Then in the 50s, it was League of Devotees, and that he finally left there. And then finally in the 60s, Prabhupada manifested all his plans as ISKCON. The next section I call a branch of Lord Chaitanya's movement. In his commentary to the Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita Adi Leela, chapter 12, text 73, Prabhupada identifies ISKCON as a, quote, branch of the Bhakti Kalpa Turu, Lord Chaitanya's, quote, desire tree of devotional service. Though but a branch, his mission carries the spiritual power to transplant the, quote, tree of love of Godhead worldwide. Prabhupada memorably begged for that empowerment in the poem he wrote the day he landed in America. As one verse reads, quote, "O Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance. Make me dance, O Lord, make me dance as you like." Unquote. That was, of course, one stanza from his poem, Markine Bhagavat Dharma, Teaching Krishna Consciousness in America. During his first year in the West, when the Lord revealed to Prabhupada he would have to start a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, the same educational purpose he had announced for the League of Devotees, he now declared in ISKCON's incorporation papers. So this is the first purpose that Prabhupada, because when Prabhupada founded ISKCON, he had to list purposes of it, because it was a legal, what we call a non-profit religious organization, corporation. So he was legally bound to list the purposes of the organization, so that when the organization would be audited, that the auditors could see if the funds were being managed according to the purposes of the organization. So you may remember this first purpose. Quote, "To systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large, and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world." Very bold first purpose. And all the purposes unfold from that as being educational purposes. 6 more points followed, all reflecting the same educational mood and mission. In 1976, 10 years after Prabhupada had incorporated ISKCON, he was back in New York City to celebrate Rath Yatra. So Prabhupada established ISKCON at 26 2nd Avenue, New York City, 66. But it wasn't until 76 that they were actually able to have a Rath Yatra in New York, because New York was very stingy on giving out permits, because it's a very big city, a very dangerous place. They only allow it for a couple of things. But this year, actually, just last month in June, they were able to finally come back after COVID and have another live Rath Yatra. But the first one was in 76. And Prabhupada was there for them. In 1976, 10 years after he had incorporated ISKCON, Prabhupada was back in New York City to celebrate Rath Yatra, the temple's first chariot parade. Reflecting on his society's global expansion in such a short time, Prabhupada compared ISKCON to Varahadev, the Lord's boar incarnation. as Lord Varaha had appeared from the nostril of Lord Brahma, and then quickly assumed a cosmic form, so ISKCON had appeared in a tiny little storefront, so to speak, a little hole in the wall on New York's Lower East Side, and quickly covered the earth. It had done so because Prabhupada had been utterly and absolutely surrendered to Krishna's plan, whose, quote, movements or phases he had been planning since the 1940s. Sometimes Prabhupada called these phases waves or movements. So we're going to look at the way ISKCON, Prabhupada unfolded, revealed ISKCON in phases. The first phase I call Holy Names and Holy Books. In a 1950s Back to Godhead article highlighting the importance of absorption in sacred sound, Prabhupada wrote, quote, leaders and politicians may take lessons from the life of Mahatma Gandhi. So in each case, Prabhupada was invoking Gandhi. Because everyone knew Gandhi, no one knew Prabhupada. So Prabhupada's trying to capitalize on Gandhi's name to put forth a spiritual revolution. Leaders and politicians may take lessons from the life of Mahatma Gandhi in respect of his daily evening prayer meetings and regular recitation of Bhagavad Gita. Reciting the Gita makes one able to get rid of the demoniac way of life and gradually rise up to the plane of pure devotional life of the gods. Launching that, so that was in a part of a BTG piece in May 56. So 10 years later, launching ISKCON in 1966, Prabhupada was the exemplar of ecstatic devotion. Brows knit, eyes slit in concentration. Swamiji led his first followers in chanting Hare Krishna for hours together inside the storefront that first summer, then outside in nearby parks that fall. Those publicized outings were an historic marker in Prabhupada's public outreach, which he continued to expand globally through his followers. Prabhupada used to say, when I finally took the chanting outside the storefront and went to that Tompkins Square Park by that tree, that was actually the beginning of the public preaching. Back at the storefront, he would hold Bhagavad Gita classes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening. Since Prabhupada had not finished translating his Bhagavad Gita as it is, he used the version of a famous impersonalist whose commentary Prabhupada exposed as misleading speculation. That was, of course, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, the first president of India under Nehru, the prime minister. Not until late 1968 would Prabhupada's As It Is edition appear, especially for his followers. Till then, Prabhupada himself was the main focus, the holy names and holy books issuing from one empowered holy man. To impress upon his followers their responsibility to continue spreading Krishna's teachings after he was gone, Prabhupada had them start an American edition of Back to Godhead. Rolling off old mimeograph machines at first, by the end of the decade, BTG had become a colorful magazine whose copies ISKCON devotees would offer people gathered round their street chanting parties. These were the infant days of the literature distribution that would become a hallmark of Prabhupada's movement. Now I call phase 2 temples and deities. So first there was, Prabhupada introduced the chanting, holy names, and even though he hadn't published even his own Gita, he was reading from Dr. Radhakrishnan's Gita, because Prabhupada said the translations, they're okay. They're 90% accurate, but the purports, Prabhupada said, are all rubbish. So they would read Radha Krishna's translation, and then Prabhupada would speak the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta to his first followers. Phase 2, temples and deities. In the above-mentioned 1956 BTG article, Prabhupada cited Gandhi's, quote, temple entry movement to show the crucial role temples play in a spiritual revolution. Though Gandhi was known as, quote, a politician among saints, Prabhupada praised him for trying to restore the deity forms of Krishna to temples desecrated by Hindu-Muslim violence. Unfortunately, he wrote, the temples have become, quote, rendezvous of demoniac dance. So many plague spots for preaching atheism. Hence his proposal to regenerate the temples as centers of spiritual education. So what was that demoniac dance? Well, very often sahajas would come in and grotesquely imitate the ecstasy of the gopis in love with Krishna. And that's what Prabhupada meant by demoniac dance. During ISKCON's launch a decade later, as Prabhupada's raw recruits became practiced to chant Hare Krishna and hear Bhagavad Gita, Krishna deities often appeared first as devotional paintings in low-rent storefronts, then as imported murtis blessing former churches. So the first ISKCON centers were these little cheap storefronts, first in New York and then San Francisco, because there was no money. Prabhupada didn't have any money, and the counterculture people who were joining, they didn't have any money. So it was just, they were just hanging on, that we say, on a shoestring. And so there were no deities either, except when artistic people started to join, then Prabhupada had them paint paintings of the Panchatattva. In 26 Second Avenue, my god sister Jadharani was given a picture of the Panchatattva by Prabhupada, and under his guidance, she painted that. And that became the first image that they worshipped. Surprisingly, quote, homemade forms appeared right away in the first San Francisco temple. So this was out of character. Mostly it was paintings in the early days, in the 60s. But if you know the history of the San Francisco temple, right away there were some forms that appeared. And that was also a little storefront. A storefront in the heart of America's counterculture. It was right in the middle of the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco, where all the counterculture people were coming to celebrate what they thought was freedom through psychedelics and rock and roll music. Prabhupada asked a skilled devotee to carve deities modeled after figurines spotted in an import store. Never mind that the carver's wife had shoplifted them, or that the carver himself wasn't yet following the principles of Krishna consciousness. Inclusive Prabhupada was inviting everyone to appreciate the deity in his unusual form as Jagannath, the Lord of the universe. And where else but in psychedelic San Francisco would people so easily accept his invitation and bow before Jagannath's large, festive eyes. Under those watchful eyes, Prabhupada was thus able to slip past the iconoclasts and introduce deity worship to Westerners. So this is very significant, because the Western world, most of the people in the West, if they're religious, then they identify with the so-called Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. which condemn images, worshiping images. But in psychedelic San Francisco, when, the history of Malati Mataji, she just kind of took them out of this import store. There was 3 bins. And when she brought the first one to Prabhupada, because she thought they'd be fascinating to Swamiji because they looked kind of Indian. And she was shocked when Prabhupada saw this little image, and then he offered pranams. And Prabhupada said, "Oh, Jagannath has come. Were there any more?" And so she went back and she got Baladev and Subhadra Maharani. And then Prabhupada asked her if she knew anybody who could carve a larger version of those, because they were just tiny figurines. And Malati said, "Oh, Sam, yes, Sam. I don't think they were married yet. It was Sam and Melanie, became Malati and Shyam Sundar. He knows how to carve." Yeah, so Sam carved, according to Prabhupada's specifications, in that little figurine, the first Jagannath deities. And to this day, in the San Francisco Bay Area, the temple there is called New Jagannath Puri. Prabhupada named it right away because Jagannath appeared there very early. So in the freewheeling psychedelic San Francisco, when the visitors would come in to chant, and then one day they saw these images installed on an altar, they would ask, "Who's that?" And so the devotees say, "Oh, that's Lord Jagannath, the Lord of the universe," because that's what Prabhupada had told them, Swamiji had told them. So they were open to anything. So they said, "Far out, man." And they would follow the devotees and bow down to Lord Jagannath, just because they were open to everything. So this way, deity worship slipped into the Western world through psychedelic San Francisco. All right, phase 3, initiation and congregation. Now this is an example of how things happen in different orders, in different sequence in East and West. In a 1949 letter to Indian Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Sardar Patel, Prabhupada wrote, quote, "The third item," and Prabhupada is talking about in Gandhi's vision of how to re-spiritualize humanity. "The third item is to take up the Harijan movement. This movement is, in the real sense, a spiritual initiation movement. And this should be organized in such a manner that people all over the world may take interest in it," unquote. So the, quote, Harijan movement was Gandhi's attempt to allow everyone into the temples, not just the higher castes, by declaring everyone a Harijan, quote, a person of God. That's true, Prabhupada noted, but in order for everyone to become fit to associate with the Lord, the Harijans must be initiated into a restorative path, a purifying process. As crude metal is said to transmute to gold in an alchemical process, so even a crude human being, by accepting initiation from a bona fide spiritual master, can gradually be restored to his original spiritual nature. Initiated devotees would gradually become the core of a wider congregation, whose history and development would vary from country to country. When Prabhupada brought his first Western disciples to India, for example, they were the talk of the nation. Why would materially successful Westerners give up everything to dance and sing Hare Krishna in the streets? Quote, "You want to imitate Westerners?" Prabhupada would chide his countrymen. "Then imitate these Westerners. They are fed up with so-called modern civilization," unquote. Rather, quote, "The material advancement of the Western countries and the spiritual assets of India should combine for the elevation of all human society. That was the strategy of Andha Pangu Nyaya, the logic of the blind man and the lame man. So in this analogy, Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj would say, India has become lame due to her neglect of her own heritage, her own spiritual culture. She's become poverty-stricken and occupied by foreign invaders. But there's still vision of what the purpose of life is in the Vedic literature. And the West is very strong materially, but blind spiritually. So if you put the lame person on the back, you're on the shoulders of the blind person, then you have a good combination. You got somebody who's stout and strong, supporting the person with vision. Concerned that Indians might come to see the Western devotees as mere performers, some observers were already dismissing them as, quote, spiritual hippies, or even CIA spies. Prabhupada temporarily suspended their street chanting and engaged them in a new program, life membership. For supporting ISKCON, members would receive whatever publications and accommodations the society could offer them. Such respectable people would become the first congregational members, as well as invaluable allies in the struggle to establish Prabhupada's movement in India. In the West, where people in general often regard Krishna consciousness as, quote, foreign, the congregation has taken more time to develop. So right away, Prabhupada started a congregation of sorts with his life membership program when he saw that there was suspicion that perhaps the devotees were CIA spies or they were just spiritual hippies and not real authentic Vaishnavas. So in the West, where people in general often regard Krishna consciousness as foreign, the congregation has taken more time to develop. Initially living and trained inside temples, Prabhupada's first Western followers have since spread out into the community, working and raising families to become congregational members themselves. So my generation, we were all inside these urban communes. And then as we got older and had desire to marry and have families, we became the first congregation. Otherwise, when we were inside the temples in Prabhupada's time with us, that's how it was. You were either in the temple and you were a devotee, or you were outside the temple and you were in Maya. There was no way to be Krishna conscious outside the temple, because outside the temple in the West was a spiritual desert. It was a wasteland. You immediately just were overwhelmed, overcome by the wasteland of materialism. The Indian diaspora, the dispersion of Indians all over the world. The Indian diaspora since that time and the rise of yoga culture worldwide have also helped turn ISKCON into a congregational movement. To move the Hare Krishna movement from the margin to the mainstream, Prabhupada identified a fourth phase his followers still need to embrace and develop. So I'm just going to introduce you to the fourth phase. And then we're going to actually deal with that fourth phase in next week's lesson. So the last section is called Phase 4, Natural Life. In the same letter to Dr. Patel, Prabhupada wrote, quote, the fourth item is to organize the much discussed caste system as a solution of the natural divisions of human beings all over the world. Nationalistic division of human races is artificial, but scientific division of the caste system by quality and work, as envisaged in the Bhagavad Gita, is natural. Prabhupada, of course, is talking about the natural visions of Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyas. To show the world a better way to live and to leave based on the Gita's teachings is the final phase of Prabhupada's mission. As the body's different parts are equally appreciated for their contribution to the whole body's welfare, so the social body's different classes would be equally valued for their role in serving the Supreme Lord. High or low, head to toe, deep inside, we're all God's servants. And here's a quote. This is from a Prabhupada essay called The Conception of the Gita Nagari, part 2. It's written around 1948, just after Gandhi, same year Gandhi was assassinated. Because living the way Krishna lives, amid his land and cows, looks and feels very different from the way most of us live in the modern world, and because the first 3 phases of Prabhupada's mission are perhaps more easily adaptable to modernity, we have been slow to approach phase 4, whose Sanskrit name is Varnashram. Yet that is the timeless and natural spiritual life we and our modern world have been seeking and desperately need to recover. Okay, so that's a little preview of next week. Next week, it's called His Varnashram Challenge. Okay, Prabhus, I'll be very happy to hear your questions and comments now. So please fire away.
Hare Krishna. If there are any questions, devotees can put it either in the chat box or they can raise their hands. Those who raise hands will be given first preference.
I'm going to turn off my fan so I can hear you better.
Okay.
Okay. Oops.
The first question from the chat box. While reading, it was mentioned that in America, Lord revealed to Prabhupada that he'll have to start a new branch of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, we may have touched on it last time too.
Yes.
That when Prabhupada came, he was really just trying to revive the Gaudiya Math, the Gaudiya mission. He didn't intend to start anything new. But because his godbrothers didn't, weren't up to it after all the fighting and the offenses that were committed to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta by not forming a GBC and working cooperatively. After 10 months of hoping his godbrothers would respond, Lord Chaitanya just showed him over time that you're going to have to start, you're going to have something fresh. You're going to have to make a clean break from all this dysfunction and fighting that the Gaudiya Math had dissolved into. So when Prabhupada realized that, as early as the spring of '66 in March, he was meeting with a sympathetic attorney who liked to help spiritual nonprofit groups legally start their organization. His name was Stephen Goldsmith. And so with the help of Mr. Goldsmith, on July 13th, 1966, we're coming up to the solar anniversary. It's July now. Let's see, it'll be, wow, how many years? 60, 50, what is it? Anyway, you do the math. 55 years or whatever it is. Prabhupada incorporated ISKCON. Yeah, because he had his own place. He had 26 2nd Avenue, the storefront, and he had his own apartment behind. So even though it's a new organization, it's the same Krishna consciousness. It's And it's a branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. Prabhupada's not starting a new Sampradaya. Sometimes you hear devotees say, Sampradaya, Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. Well, that's a misnomer. He didn't start a new Sampradaya. He just revived the Gaudiya Sampradaya through ISKCON. So, and everything he gave us, he would always tell us, I'm not invented anything. What I'm teaching is nothing new. It's the same timeless message, but it's old wine, Prabhupada said, in new bottles to make it relevant for the new time and place he was in. So such a radically different place. I mean, Gaudiya Vaishnavism had not been outside of India. So those first 10 months from September 65 to July 66, he was studying Americans. He was writing his godbrothers, and he wanted to make it, relevant and up to date in terms of repackaging the message. And to this day, that's what we always have to do. There's always this tension, between tradition and innovation. His Holiness Bhakti Vinod Maharaj, based in Coimbatore, he gave a nice seminar at the last ILS about tradition and innovation, and how if we don't keep up with the times, then we'll become irrelevant. Even if we have a timeless message, we always have to present it in a way that's relevant to people, that people can relate to. So even though Prabhupada told us, if I have any credit, it's that I haven't changed anything. He didn't change the principles or the message, but he was totally innovative in using everything that he found in the West to spread Krishna consciousness. And Bhaktisiddhanta himself did this. Bhaktisiddhanta, we hear, went on the radio and rode in cars to see pictures. So Prabhupada took that to whole other level by riding in jet planes, 14 times in 12 years around the globe, and making records, and just using everything available. And now that we're in the digital age, Prabhupada would use that. He would use whatever's available to go to every town and village and electronic device. This is Lord Chaitanya. This is the best use of this technology. We can go not only to every town and village, we can go to everybody's electronic device. As I'm speaking to you on Zoom through my phone. So it's the same sampradaya, back to the question. But it's a fresh branch, and because it was founded by the person who became our Srila Prabhupada, was coming directly in the line of Mahaprabhu and the 6 Goswamis and the previous Acharyas and Bhakti Vinod and Bhakti Siddhanta. It has such potency. I mean, Prabhupada translated the whole thing, the whole sampradaya, intact. It has such potency, even though it's only a branch. It has the potency to actually go to every town and village. It's that potent, kind of like a banyan tree, A banyan tree drops roots from the branches, and you don't know where it ends or where it begins, as Krishna says in the Gita. So we're very privileged to be a part of that sampradaya, and to the extent that we're practicing the teachings we're receiving, we also partake of that potency, so we can also spread it all over the world, or at least all over our cities. Okay, good question. Any more questions?
Yes, Prabhuji. Before we go to the next question, can I share a reflection which came to me as this question came and as it was answered? Remember, in the first canto, Shaunikadi Rishis are congratulating Sutta Goswami. When Sutta Goswami says that I will try to present the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Yatha Dhitam Yatha Mati. means as I have heard faithfully, I will try to present it. And Yathamati means like based on the receptivity of the audience and based on the interest level of the audience, I will try to engage them properly. So I was just thinking that in as far as preaching or spreading the message of Krishna consciousness is concerned, the Yathadhitam aspect of being faithful to the Acharya is very important. But at the same time, Yathamati aspect where we need to learn, I need to learn how to present it. Otherwise, if we do not innovate, we will become irrelevant. We have to present it the way people would like to receive it. Just like Prabhupada translated the whole Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya into English. Nobody had ever imagined that. So, both aspects are necessary for preaching.
Yeah.
I just want to share that. The next question is, when Prabhupada started preaching in New York, the Bhagavad Gita as it is was still incomplete. And at that time, he was also facing cash crunch. How did he manage to get the first copies printed, and how did the initial editions of Bhagavad Gita perform?
That's a whole drama. I mean, the short answer is Krishna just did it. Krishna stepped in. You're right. They were just, poor. They were just cash poor. But but Prabhupada, his consciousness was so rich with Krishna consciousness. So Brahmananda Prabhu, the late Brahmananda, who passed away in 2015, who wrote a book with the help of my godbrother Satyaraj called Swamiji, tells the story of Prabhupada finishing his 1,000-page manuscript. And Prabhupada said, okay, I finished this manuscript. Now, this is in 68. Now you have to go around to the publishers, because we're in New York City. So the biggest publishers in the country and some in the whole world, some of them are right here in New York. So you have to go and convince them to publish this Bhagavad Gita as it is. So Brahmananda is like, and so Brahmananda said, well, Swamiji, because they were still calling him Swamiji, or it might have been Prabhupada, yeah, because in the spring of 68, Swamiji became Prabhupada, as I told. So Brahmananda said, but Prabhupada, I don't know how to deal with these people. These are very sophisticated, high-powered corporate people. First of all, I think I'll have to put on a suit and a tie. And so Prabhupada said, that's fine, whatever you need to do. Prabhupada in his household years, he was keeping hair and had a mustache, and he looked very dapper, We see the pictures, a couple of pictures. So Brahmananda went around in Manhattan, New York City, to all these publishers, and they would take one look at the manuscript and they would say, I'm sorry, we don't do religious books. Because think about it, this was the era of God is dead, do your own thing, the sexual revolution, contraception, abortion was coming in, abortion was going to be legalized in a few years. So here's all this, not only was it religious material, but it was full of Sanskrit. It was totally foreign to these people. So they would say, I'm sorry, we can't touch this. And then Brahmananda would come back discouraged. And then Prabhupada said, don't be discouraged. I also, people said no to me for years in India. And so just keep trying. So then Brahmananda, he went to big publisher, and still big. It's called Macmillan Company. I think they had their offices in the Empire State Building, famous, iconic building, if you've heard of it. And so, so he went there, and oh, I know what happened first. Yeah, let me double back a little bit. So yeah, they were putting, the devotees were putting ads for the Bhagavad Gita even before it was published. This is typical Prabhupada, no? In the local underground papers, the papers that would have, and journals that would appeal to the counterculture people, like the East Village Other and the Village Voice, all these, it was all happening in the Lower East Side. This is where all the seekers were, the young people. So one fine day, the devotees got a letter from somebody somebody had written them for a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. And because they were advertising it's coming soon, right? So this person wrote that, oh yes, I've heard that this is a very mystical book. I want to get it, so please put me down and let me know when it's coming out. And it was it was sent to 26 Second Avenue in the official envelope of the Macmillan Company, Macmillan Publishing Company. So Brahmananda said, look at this, Swamiji, or look at this, Prabhupada. We've gotten a request for the Bhagavad Gita from Macmillan. Macmillan wants the Gita. And so Prabhupada said, just see. Now, this is our opportunity. So you go there in your suit and tie, and you find the person, the person gave his name, and Macmillan Company, and you will, and you speak to him about the importance that Macmillan publishes the book. And if Macmillan publishes the book, then you will get your book. You want the book? Okay, first we need a publisher. We need somebody who will take it on. So Brahmananda, he goes, to the Empire State Building, on, I forget the address. Anyway, it's a famous address, 42nd Street and something. And he goes in and he asks for this person at the desk. And then the people don't know who the person is. And finally, Brahmananda is walking around and he meets, he goes to the mail room where the people are sorting the mail that's coming in Macmillan. And he meets the guy. The guy was just a lowly worker. He wasn't a big guy in Macmillan. He was just a lowly worker in the mail room. So Brahmananda was downcast. Oh no, it was just some lowly worker. It wasn't somebody who could actually help us in the mailroom. But then the guy was interested in the Bhagavad Gita. So Brahmananda, he, even though he knew it wasn't really, okay. So what happened was, so then Brahmananda leaves. He goes back to 26th Second Avenue. And he said, oh, Prabhupada, this person who wrote this letter, he was just a clerk in the mailroom. And so Prabhupada said, don't worry. Krishna will help you. You go back there. You go back there. And even if it's just a lowly clerk, Krishna will help you. And Brahmananda said, Swamiji or Prabhupada, he had a twinkle in his eye, like he knew that Krishna had a plan. So Brahmananda goes back the next day to Macmillan, finds the guy again, and he starts preaching to this guy of how somehow or other you've got to help me get Macmillan to publish this book, even though you're very low on the totem pole, so to speak, in the organization. So he's talking about the Bhagavad Gita. And then lo and behold, one of the top people in the company, maybe I think it was the editor-in-chief of Macmillan, he happens to walk by the mailroom and he overhears Brahmananda preaching to this guy about the Bhagavad Gita. And so the editor says, what? Bhagavad Gita? You're talking about, you have a manuscript for the Bhagavad Gita? Well, we're publishing an Eastern religion series. We have a book about Taoism and Buddhism. We need a Bhagavad Gita. Specifically, we were thinking we need a Bhagavad Gita, a new edition. So what do you have there? So Brahmananda, he hands this guy, I forget his name, but he hands the guy a 1,000-page manuscript, Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. And so he said, oh, very good. So I will take a look at this. I'm the main editor. If I like it, then it will get published. Other lower editors, they might have their opinions, but if what I say gets published. So Brahmananda is in total ecstasy because they're on some kind of deadline where they have to get it published really fast. And they were getting desperate, Macmillan was, to find a new edition of the Gita. And lo and behold, Krishna had put Brahmananda right in the right place at the right time. So Brahmananda gives the manuscript to this man, and he goes back to the temple, and he tells Swamiji what happened. And Swamiji said, Prabhupada said, oh, yes, I knew Krishna would help you. This is our in. So, of course, what happened was, because the manuscript was 1,000 pages, equal to 1,000 book pages. So Macmillan, they were so afraid that, such a book so ponderous and full of so much Sanskrit, it would never really fly. But it was so, but the person reading it could tell it was very authentic, that the translator and the commentator was a practitioner of the Gita. So he was thrilled, but he just said, okay, look, we're going to publish this, but because if you want us to publish it, we have to have the rights. You have to sign over the rights to us. And we're going to publish it to about a third of the normal of what your Swami has given us. So it must have been heartbreaking for Prabhupada to do that. But Prabhupada dutifully, cut it down to the edition that all of us read until 1972. When I first read the Gita in 1970, in Toronto, Canada, when I was up there, expatriating, from America because of the Vietnam War. That was it. It was a purple paperback with a black Vishnu silhouette and with endorsements by counterculture heroes of the day like Allen Ginsberg and Denise Levertov and Thomas Merton. That's how Macmillan hoped it would sell, if these well-known counterculture figures endorsed it. And so, of course, he didn't know the true potency of it. It sold anyway. But so that's how it happened. It was just like Prabhupada was trying to engage Gandhi because no one knew him, Prabhupada, but everybody knew Gandhi. So similarly, we didn't have a book trust yet. We were just a poor little, band of ex-hippies with Prabhupada as our Pied Piper, Swamiji. So we, with the help of Macmillan, they became the blind people who were stout and strong with money. They had the funds and they had the name and they had the marketing and the network to get the book out. So that's how it happened. It's quite a miracle. It's one of the many miracles that happened in Prabhupada's presence. Because of Prabhupada's pure desire, Krishna opened up all the doors. Jai, that's quite a saga. And Brahmananda knew all, he's not with us anymore, but thank God he told all the details of that later. When he used to tell the story, he was in such ecstasy remembering it, all the twists and turns. And especially when that editor came and overheard him talking about the Gita and practically grabbed it out of his hand. What is this? Bhagavad Gita, we need it. Jai. Hare Krishna. More questions?
Yes, Prabhu. The next question is, please help us to understand the mood of the devotees when Srila Prabhupada was returning to India for the first time.
That was last time. Remember we did that.
Yeah,
Remember
done
his
that.
mission fruits. So didn't I answer that last time?
Yes, you have.
Okay. Well, the mood was total. I mean, there's pictures. You see devotees. Of course, I told the story of San Francisco in July, and how Prabhupada could not get his health back after the stroke. And then finally, Prabhupada saying, I have to go back to India, for Ayurvedic massage. I need India's heat. I need Ayurvedic medicines. And then and it'll work. It's not working here because the weather's not cooperating. And I don't need the care I need. He knew, because he was a former pharmacist also. And he had plenty of contacts in the medical community. And he knew who was good and who was a quack, who was not good. So Prabhupada knew just where to go, knew just what to do. So there's a famous picture, I think it's in the Leelamrita too, at least in the original edition, when Prabhupada finally went from San Francisco to India, but he went back through New York because he wanted to say goodbye to his New York devotees. There's a famous picture of Prabhupada at the Air India gate. And he's surrounded, this is 67 now, in July, and he's surrounded by the devotees who have joined him. And there's been several initiations now. He had dozens of followers. And they're all surrounding him. And Kirtanananda, he took Kirtanananda with him. Kirtanananda is dressed in a suit and tie, and shaved head and tilak, and shikha. And Prabhupada is there. And Prabhupada's posing for the camera, but all around Prabhupada are all these devotees, and they look so sad. I mean, they're totally bereft. It was like Krishna leaving Vrindavan or something. You can see they're crying and they're just praying, and they don't know if they're going to ever see Prabhupada again. Or Swamiji, he was still Swamiji then. So that was the mood, yeah. But one thing Prabhupada did, as you know, he wrote thousands of letters. And while he was away, he wrote letters. And he practically sustained all of us by his letters. This is before email or Zoom or the internet or anything. Prabhupada, he practically established and spread an entire worldwide movement through these pale blue aerograms that would float in. So he would just, and we accepted him as Krishna's representative. So we knew that he had a hotline to Krishna. He was seeing Krishna face to face. He was a confidential servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. So we were just totally thrilled that anything ever Prabhupada said or did or wrote or spoke, we just accepted it as the gospel truth, the absolute truth. So when there was a letter that would come in, everybody would gather around, and whoever the letter was addressed to would read the letter out loud to all the devotees. And that was how we continued living. Of course, I wasn't in the movement then. I didn't come until 70. But that letter writing, it continued practically till the end. So they were very sad. But then Prabhupada encouraged them. As soon as Prabhupada got to India, he immediately, it was July, so you can imagine he went to Delhi first, and it was so hot. But Prabhupada loved it. He stepped right into it, and Kirtanananda, he felt like he was in an oven. He had a hard time, of course, in India in July. So Prabhupada got better. He got his massages, and he was taking walks, and he took his medicines. So he came back in December 67. And when he came back, this time he came back through San Francisco, so over the Pacific. And when he arrived in San Francisco, the devotees were amazed that he looked so robust and healthy and invigorated and fired up like never before, like even better than before. You know? And sometimes Prabhupada would say, that's when the movement really started to take off, when I got better and I came back. And I felt like I had the energy of a young man. So sad to see him go, so glad to see him go, and he was not well. And so glad to have him back as still Swamiji, as Swamiji better than ever. Jai Prabhupada. Okay, we still have some time. We have about 20 minutes or so.
Yes. So if there are any other questions, devotees can put it in the chat box or they can raise their hand to ask. I have a question, Prabhuji. Tell us something about your interactions with Srila Prabhupada as a memory which you have with yourself, from which we learn something.
This is the default question when no one's asking a question. I remember you've done this before, Prabhu. And I always say, well, you know, I didn't interact much at all with Prabhupada. Because I told you I was too much in awe of Prabhupada, so I kept my distance. But I do have a whole series, besides Founder Acharya Essentials, I do have a whole series called Lessons from His Leelas, when I do recount the 6 or 7 times that I did see Prabhupada, was with him. So I have to save that for that. I don't want to give it all away, but yeah, and I've told a few things, so yeah, I just don't want to give it all away. But the one thing I can say is that Prabhupada, he was, you know, when you meet a famous person in person, it's something of a letdown, because after all, he's a conditioned soul, he or she. But when you met Prabhupada, when you saw Prabhupada, he was better than what you imagined. He was larger than life. He was purer than you can imagine. He was like you said, make me dance, O Lord, make me dance as you like. So you were looking at a resident of Goloka, and it was stunning to see. He wasn't walking or talking or moving or doing anything the way an ordinary person would. I saw something on the chat. What is the next? What was that?
When did ISKCON actually start gaining momentum and attract attention?
You know, it's funny, you can ask that even today, right? Because depending on where we are in the world, ISKCON is more or less prominent. So in some places like India, you know, because of the culture and the history and everything, and the contacts we have, ISKCON is very prominent. You know, like every time there's a Janmashtami, you know, whoever the prime minister is will issue a congratulations to ISKCON for spreading Krishna consciousness all over the world. I mean, we've never had that in America, you know. I can't imagine Joe Biden, you know, issuing a proclamation that this is Janmashtami Day all over America because ISKCON has spread Krishna's glories. No, it's not. You know, we're still a rather marginal group in America. I mean, we're more respectable for sure. As the history has allowed us, to do things that people can relate to, through Prabhupada's books and through prasadam and everything. But I always think of the prediction of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, or actually the prediction of Lord Nityananda, that when this Adbhuta Mandir, this TOVP, we're building, is finished, the preaching will expand unlimitedly, Lord Nityananda told Srila Jiva Goswami in Navadvip Dham Mahatmya, all over the world. Because, as Prabhupada well knew, people, they're impressed by buildings. So look at the building that's going up in Sridham Mayapur. It's like the biggest temple in the world, practically. So, and it's a genius blend of science and spirituality, the temple of the Vedic planetarium. So this is perfect to attract the modern mind. The temple of the Vedic planetarium, what is that? You mean these Hindus know something about the cosmos? So people are going to come from all over the world just to see this. So that's definitely going to be a big boost to the preaching. When did ISKCON really take off? So in terms of ISKCON's history, just the history of our own organization, Prabhupada noted that after Radhalanda and Ishwar were installed in December 69, December 14th, 1969, Radhalanda and Ishwar, because London is still kind of like the crossroads of the world, and it's got the largest Indian community outside India. That's when Prabhupada's travels really expanded. From there, then he started his world tours, because ISKCON wasn't big enough until then. So that event of Krishna coming, to London, right in a very important part of the city, Bury Place, that was right where all the government buildings and the famous British Museum and all these places were. So that was a big takeoff. So according to the place and the time and what you mean by took off, we'll know, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, we'll know when Krishna consciousness is really arrived, when the high court judges have tilak. And in some places they do. In some places there are Vaishnavas in these kinds of positions. Okay, another question.
Yes, Prabhu. Actually, 3-4 questions have come up.
And try to pick one that I haven't answered before.
Okay. A question. Based on your realizations, as you would have seen many Vyas Pujas with Prabhupada himself present, what would you think would be Prabhupada's instruction to the devotees on his 125th anniversary?
Actually, I was only present for one Vyasa Puja where Prabhupada was there. I've told New Vrindavan. Did I tell about that yet? I think I did. Let's see, how does that? A little bit I've told. Yeah, so the question is, now that's the 125th anniversary of Prabhupada's appearance, what would be his message? Of course, the Vyasa Puja I saw, yeah, that was in lesson 1, the spiritual masters. Prabhupada was lecturing to all these VIPs at New Vrindavan. And his message to them, because of the time and place and circumstance, was he was trying to demystify the Guru and help them understand that a spiritual master is a representative of God, and that Krishna consciousness was not a cult. So now 125 years since his appearance, and some, let's see, 44 years since his disappearance. Boy, that's quite a Vaishnavera Kriya Mudra Vigyehana Bujoy. One should not pretend to know the mind of a Vaishnava. It's hard to imagine what Prabhupada would say in this time and place. But, he is fully present still in the heart of his sincere followers. So I think that would probably have to be the definitive answer, that Prabhupada is still present and rules the heart of the sincere follower. He lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. That was Prabhupada's own answer, in a sense, to your question, because that's how he dedicated his India-produced first canto Bhagavatam to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada on the occasion of the 26th anniversary of his disappearance. 36, disappearing the last day, and then 62. And then Prabhupada said, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him. So, because now the movement's worldwide, it's not just in a little storefront. And instead of, there were 108 centers when Prabhupada left us, very tellingly, 108 centers, very auspiciously. Now there are hundreds. Sometimes we hear 600 centers, counting all the different kinds of affiliates and like that. The message would undoubtedly vary according to the time, the place, and the people. And that's what Prabhupada did. Wherever he went, he had the same overall message, but he would pitch the message. He would calibrate it according to where he was. He didn't say it the same way. Generally there was the same message. And especially if, like even in India, it was still being run by Americans, ISKCON. But according to the time, the place, the people, he would measure and deliver his message. So I'm just going to have to throw it right back in your court, and you have to think, what would he say to the devotees in Bangalore, Whitehead on August 31st? At least that's the date where we are. The TT always varies a day or two, according to the calendar. What would he say to the Bangalore Whitehead Yatra? That's for you to know. That's for you to search your heart and discern. I know what he would say to us here in ISKCON Tucson because of what's going on here. But you have to come up with that answer. That's Prabhupada's challenge to you. Okay, more questions. Let's see, we have 10 minutes.
Yes, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you had mentioned that this ISKCON is one of the branches of Lord Chaitanya's tree. What could be the branches of this tree of Lord Chaitanya? Are they there only on this planet, or are they spread around the universe?
Well, that's a real cosmic question, isn't it? Yeah, and I also said that even though it's a branch, only, quote, only a branch, because the potency was revived by Bhaktivinoda Thakur and then taken to the next level by Bhakti Siddhanta Thakur, and then apparently eclipsed, by the non-cooperation of Bhakti Siddhanta's disciples, but then brilliantly and potently revived by our Prabhupada. It has the potential to go all over the world, and even in Isopanishad, Prabhupada says the Krishna consciousness movement has the potential to go to all over the universe. So the Krishna consciousness movement, what is that, right? That's the original consciousness of every living being. right now in America, they just came out, the government came out with a statement about UFOs. What are UFOs? Because America's been studying UFOs, like for 50 years, 60 years, since the late 40s. So of course, because they're blind, they're just trying to relate to people from other worlds through their material senses. They can't say definitively, right? We can't say that anything is out there. So, of course, but we know that life is everywhere. So that means the Krishna consciousness movement has to go everywhere. Now, the Krishna consciousness movement in Lord Chaitanya's time was called, what was that? I forget the name again. Sri Vishva Vaishnava Raj Sabha. Yeah. That's the Goswamis coined that. And then it was revived by Bhakti Vinod. And then it became the Gaudiya mission. So at least we have to do what we have to do. From our founder Acharya, we have to take it to every town and village. So that takes a lot of surrender. Could you repeat the wording of the question again?
What could be the other branches of Lord Chaitanya's tree?
Yeah. Well, certainly this is the most potent branch now. I mean, since Prabhupada came to the West, so many other Gaudiya groups, they were emboldened to finally cross the ocean. But there's no contest. I mean, what the infrastructure, as I put it, that Prabhupada set up, opened up the path back to Godhead for anybody who wants to take advantage of his ISKCON Sangha. Wide, deep and broad, wide path back to Godhead. So I believe there was even a prediction by Bhaktivinoda Thakur himself that this Krishna consciousness movement would eventually absorb all other religions in the world. Because, and first of all other sampradayas and all other religions, because the only religion, as the Thakur put it, is kirtan, glorification of the Lord. So Lord Chaitanya being the avatari, the source of all the avatars, Krishna himself in the mood of Radha, has that potency to distribute in so many ways. So, but it's up to us to do that. Let's not make Lord Chaitanya, have to start a new branch, because then we fight too much, and then we split, and then we can't cooperate because we're all fighting. This is Kali Yuga. This is what happens. This is Maya. Maya does this, divides and conquers us. So whether or not ISKCON is the vehicle that will take it to every town and village, that remains to be seen. We certainly have a good start from our founder Acharya. It's also the 50th anniversary of Prabhupada being in Russia, in Moscow. I just wrote something for them. Because they invited me to Russia in 2014. So they're making a book to offer to Prabhupada on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of him being there. So our founder Acharya, so potent. So we have to follow him and cooperate. But the forms that the movement takes, that remains to be seen. At least we know something of ISKCON, international. Maybe it's not interplanetary. Prabhupada didn't say interplanetary society. He said international society. But in Upanishad, he does mention that it can go interplanetary too. So who knows? Maybe that's what Prabhupada's doing now. He's taken an easy journey to other planets. And perhaps if we follow him out of this world, that's where we'll go. That's all speculation. Who knows? Anyway, let's just follow Prabhupada's life teachings, mood, and mission, and at least we can turn the tide of history and follow him back to Godhead. Okay, just a few more minutes, maybe one more question.
There are no more questions, Prabhuji.
Okay, we can end there. So I'm glad you didn't ask me about Varnashram, because that is the next lesson.
Yeah.
It's called His Varnashram Challenge. And basically, we're going to look at the 4 ways Prabhupada used the term Varnashram. And then we're going to look at the 4 ways Prabhupada applied the kind of Varnashram he was interested in, which was Daiva, transcendental Varnashram. The way he applied that to ISKCON over 3 different time periods, very differently, but they're all connected too. They're all, it's an evolution, if you will, of Prabhupada's preaching on Varnashram from the time he got here in 65 until the time he left us in 77. So his Varnashram challenge, and of course that's the great unmet challenge still. We still haven't really done what Prabhupada wants us to do in this phase of the mission. So it's very exciting, it's very challenging, and I will be here with you again next time. Thank you for letting me back, Prabhu. It's always wonderful to be with you, and I hope to be with you in person again someday. Or for the first time. I've never been to Bangalore or Whitehead. Okay.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. We feel so happy
Thank you.
in your association every week, and we feel so touched you allowing us to ask all kinds of questions to you. We are just trying our best to become better Prabhupada Anugas, and we would Prabhupada would always say, hunt the rhinoceros down. If you want to go for hunting, hunt the rhinoceros. So
Hi.
I was just thinking that probably if Prabhupada would be speaking to ISKCON Whitefield, he would say, hunt the rhinoceros. Would give a very difficult target to us. At the same time, he would appreciate whatever we have done. And he would ask, is everything all right? And then just like that, everything would become all right. That's what I feel.
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you, Prabhupada.
all right. Thank you. I'll see you this time next week. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hare Krishna. His Grace Suresvara Prabhu ki jai.
Jai Prabhupada.